And I'm Maggie McGrath, senior editor at Forbes. August 29th marks the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, a devastating storm that killed 1,400 people and resulted in more than $300 billion of economic damages. Jonathan Porter was early in his career at AccuWeather when this storm hit. He is now AccuWeather's chief meteorologist, but at the time he was working the 3 a.m. shift, and he joins us now to talk about what it was like to issue warnings to save people in New Orleans from this devastating storm. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us.
It's good to be with you, remembering such a tragic and significant storm, one of the worst natural disasters in U.S. history.
Truly a moment in U.S. history. And I mentioned you were working the 3 a.m. shift. Can you take us back to what it was like working as a forecaster during this time? What did you know when you knew it? And how did you think about communicating that information to people in New Orleans without causing mass panic?
Well, as you mentioned, I was very early in my AccuWeather career. It was my first major storm. And I'll never forget the collaboration that we had among perhaps 35 expert meteorologists that were assembled in the early morning hours here at AccuWeather on our Hurricane Center, poring over all the data. We were all so concerned about the impacts that we saw in the New Orleans area with the fact that there would be a significant storm surge, such heavy rain, and that would threaten the levees and whether the levees could hold up. And that was the main concern that we had that prompted AccuWeather to issue one of the strongest worded forecasts we've ever done in our more than 63 years in business. And that was that we were forecasting that 50 to 75% of the city of New Orleans would be underwater. Nobody else was saying that. We were the only source that was saying that. And we were challenged by it at the time by many other media who were saying, how could you possibly say that? And we laid out all the reasons that we were so concerned about what was going to occur in the New Orleans area. And we know that that forecast and how strongly worded it was saved thousands of lives in the New Orleans area and along the Gulf Coast. People that heeded the AccuWeather forecast and left the area or got their family members out of the area. I'll never forget the notes and the emails and the letters that we got from people sometimes months after the storm saying, because you used such strong wording, I got my aunt out of the city, or I got my grandmother out of the city. And so that was such a key thing in terms of being able to best describe the impacts, because we were so concerned about what was going to unfold along the Gulf Coast and particularly in the city of New Orleans, which we were so concerned about that flooding.
Now, as you mentioned the levees, I remember the news coverage from that time talking about could the levees hold. Can you remind us all what percentage of the city ultimately ended up flooding from this storm?
It was about 70%, which was very aligned with what AccuWeather experts had been talking about well in advance. And that AccuWeather forecast, by the way, was later cited by a bipartisan congressional review committee. It's the first time to our knowledge that Congress has ever bestowed that type of recognition on any private weather source in the United States. They later indicated that AccuWeather warned of those destructive impacts 12 hours ahead of other sources and argued that extra time could have been valuable for aiding in the evacuation of people in that area if local decision makers had heeded those strong warnings from AccuWeather. The issue with the levees was that there was a storm surge that was brought up by the storm circulation that went into Lake Pontchartrain and all those coastal areas near the New Orleans area. And then once the storm moved north of New Orleans, the winds from the north put all kinds of pressure on those levees as the water was pushed onto the north shore or onto the coastal areas near Lake Pontchartrain. And that really is what resulted in the levees breaking in such a serious, catastrophic flooding situation occurring across the New Orleans metro area.